I'm the Associate Dean for Professional Education and Accreditation at Oxford Brookes Business School. Welcome to another in our autumn series of alumni sessions alumni sessions, but also equally for students, colleagues, and anyone who is interested in the things that we have to talk about. And today we've got a great session from my colleagues Kate and Lauren. They'll introduce themselves shortly and tell you what they do on the importance of sustainability and decision making, which is a topic which is very close to the heart of the school in terms of its importance in business and management, and in terms of a whole range of activities that we're engaged in, which I think Lauren and Kate will conclude with. So just to say a little bit about the alumni session, this is the second in a series of 4 sessions that we're holding during the course of October and November. A couple of weeks ago, we had a great session on entrepreneurship and enterprise from our Dean, Tim Vorley. We have another session in a couple of weeks' time on dark tourism, fascinating topic by Dr. Brianna Wyatt, talking about dark tourism. And then a couple of weeks after that, so in a month's time, we've got Dr. Christian Ehrlich talking about happiness in goal setting. So 4 very, very, very diverse topics, and display, I think, the full range of activity that the research and knowledge exchange activity that the school engages in. So welcome everyone. Thank you very much for coming along. I hope you'll find this session very interesting. I'm sure you will. And I'll hand over to Lauren and Kate to get us started.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Nick. So I think Kate and I are going to start with a little bit of an introduction to ourselves and the wider Innovation Caucus delivery team. So my name's Lauren Tuckerman. I'm a senior lecturer at Oxford Brookes Business School, teaching in business and management, and do a lot of research on sustainability, on social innovation, and social enterprise are my main fields of interest. Kate, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everybody, thanks for joining us. My name's Kate Ringham. I'm the programme lead for applied accounting, so I'm particularly interested in how accounting is featuring in the real world, and actually my research interests are around sustainability and sustainability reporting. So I was involved in this project because of that interest and the expertise there.
I don't know, Steve, do you want to do a little intro to yourself, seeing as you're named on these slides here?
Very quickly, thanks, Laura. Yes, Steve Whitman. I'm a former corporate responsibility / sustainability director in a number of big companies. I've been doing my PhD for far too long now, as Kate will tell you. I knew Tim slightly from a previous existence, and he asked me to help in this, best part of 2 years ago now, I suppose, which was very interesting.
Yeah, so we had 2 other team members who supported us in this project, and one of whom most people in this room I think will know, so Professor Tim Vorley, who's the Dean of the Business School. And then we also had Professor Alice Owen at the University of Leeds, who is a sustainability specialist, and she provided a lot of help and knowledge in this project. So that was the delivery team, that was who we were. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what the research project was, why we did it, and how it all came about. So just to briefly touch on the wider project that this particular piece of work sat under. So Tim and I and Shira Abdul Rahman are co-investigators on the Innovation Caucus, which is a project that's funded by Innovate UK and ESRC, looking at ways to embed social science insight into the innovation ecosystem. Innovate UK are the UK's innovation agency, seeking to encourage innovation in all different types of businesses, sectors, and different uses of technology across the UK. So they give out grants and finance to project-based innovation projects. Now, what the challenge was for them was that they're very familiar with the economic impacts that their work has. So they know really well when an innovation project is funded, how that impacts on the economy. But they hadn't really been gathering a lot of data on either the social or the environmental impacts of their projects. So their question to us really was, how do we assess the impacts of our funded projects? But what I'll say is tune in to see how this kind of slightly changed as the project developed, because we were working in a very applied way with this project with real life partners, and throughout we had lots of co-creation of ideas and lots of feedback into the project, so it changed a little along the way. But I'm going to hand over to Kate now to talk a little bit about the stage one of the project.
So having been asked the question, how do we assess the impacts of our funded projects, and particularly the social and environmental and societal impact, the first place we turned was to think about what the existing frameworks might be out there. So we, and this is very much the work Steve helped us with, we looked at the external environment and thought about what frameworks are out there to help organisations, be they private or public sector, to think about that social and environmental impact. And initially we identified 18 frameworks, but we then narrowed that down into 5 frameworks that we selected to review in depth. And we then highlighted 2 potential front runners, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and then another framework that is promoted by the International Integrated Reporting Council and the Sustainability Accounting Standards Boards, which is much more of a it's a reporting framework which is modelling itself very much on the way that financial standards, reporting standards, have been created. So there's quite a difference in approach to the different frameworks. Question I suppose you might say is, well, why did you look externally? Why didn't you create a framework from scratch? Well, we wanted to make sure that whatever frameworks we were using, people within the organisation and people within the funded projects potentially understood and maybe recognised. There was a piece about actually using, if there was a suitable framework in the external environment, then that actually, was potentially more efficient. Other people had already started thinking about how those frameworks might be used. So we did look at those 2 front runners. In terms of the analysis of 5 frameworks and the ones that we considered, you can see here how we were actually looking at the different frameworks. We set criteria. There were 5 criteria in terms of relevance to Innovate UK's business operations, relevance to their projects, and then relevance to the UK research and development political and policy agenda space. Ease of use was important to us, as was ease of communication. And you can see we used a 3-point scale to rate the different frameworks. And when we did that, we found that United Nations Sustainable Development Goals came out as the most appropriate based on those criteria. So just as a reminder, in case anybody in the room hasn't actually heard of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, that's the picture that's used. There are 17 goals that were part of that came out of the Rio Summit, and they are used on a global basis. The United Kingdom government is committed to working within and to promote the Sustainable Development Goals and to report on progress, although the extent to which the reporting is happening is fairly limited at the moment. But these are, a recognised set of development goals. One of the key advantages and features of using the UN Sustainable Development Goals was actually that these were developed between government, business, public, private sector, and actually they are in place for a period of time. So there's not likely to be significant change around the nature of the goals. One of the things that you, when you look at frameworks and you look at this particular space in terms of sustainability reporting, you see incredible development in a short space of time. So given that we were creating the support for decision making within Innovate, we wanted to make sure it had longevity, and that was one of the key features of these sustainable development goals. And so I think I'm going to hand back to Lauren at this stage.
Yeah, I think what we were going to do is ask people if this might be something that's a little bit. Can we go back to the previous slide, Kate, and we can ask people if they have a pet favourite SDG. This might be something that only people who end up working with the SDG so closely have. But if you have a favourite SDG, please feel free to post it in the chats. I would love to know what people think is the most important, or what their number one. Okay, no quality, that's a good one. Yeah, we like that. Anybody else, if they got a favourite? Reduced inequalities, anyone? No? Gender equality? 17 partnerships for the goals. Yeah, see, we can't do anything in isolation. Everything has to be joined up together. Good one. 18. Okay. Ooh, 18 isn't. Somebody's taking the mick out of me. 18 isn't. Like, adding their own agenda in there. I've decided that 17 is not enough. 14, Nicolette says, life below water. Yeah. All good choices. Yeah. Straw polling people on what their favourite SDG is now become my favourite afternoon activity. All taken together. Yes. 13 somewhat overriding. Yeah. So climate action. Yeah, I can see how quite a lot of things fit into climate action as well. Oh, 2, 8 and 16. So zero hunger, decent work and economic growth. And 16, peace, justice and strong institutions. Yeah, peace, justice and strong institutions is a good one that I think often people forget about. Yeah. Okay, I'm ready to move on now. I've done my little what are the favourites I like to ask. Okay, so what I wanted to say is we've not brought you here on false pretenses, right? You're going to say to me, wait a minute, the title of this was supposed to be about decision making, and all you've talked about so far is how do you do reporting? Well, this is where the kind of question of the research changed a little bit. So we looked at the SDGs, and you might think, oh well, that's it sorted. We gave them the SDGs, now they can go away, do their reporting. They've got the SDGs. What more do they need from us? Well, we looked at the SDGs, and that was going to take a little bit of operationalisation, a little bit of making those applicable and practical to the context in which Innovate UK were operating in. We also saw that, the SDGs are typically used for reporting, but how do you report on something that you've not set as a goal in the first place? So the people that you're asking for that evaluation data from didn't know that they had to do that ahead of time. So what we wanted to do is see how we can make this a bit more strategic. And we took that to Innovate UK and said, look, you could just have a framework for how to assess your impact. But what would be much more meaningful and much more valuable is if you connected that framework with a wider strategic sustainability direction. We want you to think about this and embed it at different stages of your work, so that people who are then coming to you with their evaluation data know what the expectations are, and you can also track that change over time as a long-term goal. So that was one of the reasons that we kind of took that back to them and said, this is actually more about decision making than it is just about simple reporting tactics. So that being said, we identified some key intervention points. Now, this is a bit of a work in progress, this diagram. But we're trying to kind of map out what it was we did and why it was important. So we thought that, over time, what you're aiming for is to become more impactful. So the scale of impact should increase over time. And what part of the challenge for an organisation like Innovate UK is that it sits at that interface between public policy and corporations and private business and practice. And that causes some conflict points and tensions about what people want from this sustainability agenda, what they think they should be doing, and how do you reconcile those? And that tension kind of really comes out when we look at what the project outcomes are. Like, what do we really want these projects to achieve? The private businesses who are involved in delivering them have one idea of what that might be, and then government institutions have another idea about what that might be, and how do you reconcile that? So what we were looking at was this process where you get from how the funder sets goals, what the project outputs are, as in what does it do, what the outcomes are, so what changes are happening because of that project, the funder outcomes, what changes are happening because of the overall funding that they provide, and then what goals are being achieved and how does that link into the SDGs. And we developed a series of tools to start kind of embedding the SDGs and sustainability in at key points on that journey and in at key points of intervention during that process. So what we're going to do next is take you through one by one what those tools were and how we designed them and what they were designed to do. So I'm going to hand back over to Kate to do that.
So the first tool that we started thinking about was the materiality assessment. So Steve's made a fantastic point in the chat that actually all 17 SDGs should be taken together. And we would fully support that concept. We don't want any sort of cherry picking. And certainly some of the reporting I see does appear occasionally to be a little bit along those lines. But equally, we recognise that for Innovate as that, you know, on that interface of public policy and corporate goals, they're not in a position to be able to address everything. So we did need to think about, are there some of the SDGs that for the UK context and for Innovate's context are potentially more important? And so we sought to think about that assessment of materiality. And the way we did that was to think about the importance of any particular SDG in relation to the national policy agenda, and then assess the importance of the SDG in the funders, so in Innovate's current strategy. And then we were able to plot it on this diagram. This particular style of presentation would be very much recognised in the corporate world. So when Lauren was talking about the interplay of, you know, different types of expectation within the organisation, this is very much coming from the corporate sphere of thinking about you know, a materiality assessment. When we were thinking about assessing the importance of the SDG in relation to the national policy agenda, we were thinking here about all of the UK. So we were looking at the Queen's Speech, you know, being an articulation of government planning, but also in the devolved governments. So both the Welsh and the Scottish governments have plans for government where they articulate what their policy agenda actually is, and then a range of other documents as well. And when we were looking at Innovate's current strategy, we were looking at their published strategic plans, what they were saying about their strategy and their future plans. We conducted this in terms of a content analysis. So we were looking at keywords and we were interpreting how those keywords featured within the text that they sat in. And we were able to do that assessment. The results, in terms of the results of the materiality assessment, we plotted it here, and it just for that list, in terms of which were the most material, well, unsurprisingly, SDG 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure, was the one that featured as both as highly important on both of those axes. Given Innovate were articulating what the innovation strategy is, and also the government's focus on innovation being a driver of growth, that was not surprising. And then you can see that the other SDGs that came out as being of importance, 3, good health and well-being, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, and then sustainable cities and communities and climate action. But just going back to that materiality grid, that materiality assessment, as well as being able to say, well, Innovate, we, from our analysis, these are the SDGs that we think are the ones that appear to be of importance. We also were able to maybe pull out one or two other insights. So it's interesting that SDG 7, which is, let me just check, it is the sustainable and clean energy, was actually coming out as medium and medium on both of the axes. So medium importance to Innovate's activity and of medium importance to the UK policy, which was quite a surprising finding, given we were in the area of COP26. So that was a bit interesting. What was also potentially interesting to Innovate is that 11 and 13, health and wellbeing 3, and quality education 4 were coming up as high in importance to the UK policy. Quality education possibly linked with the levelling up agenda. So they were coming out as being high in terms of UK policy, but not articulated particularly clearly through Innovate's strategy. So they weren't in the top quadrant in terms of Innovate strategy. So we were able to use this exercise to potentially offer one or two insights that might be important in terms of future strategic thinking for Innovate. So we'd identified which SDGs are material, and we'll come back in terms of when we think about the reporting aspects of this as well, when we come back to these ones. So the next tool that we identified and worked on was the concept of a heat map of impact. So the purpose of this tool and what we were seeking to achieve here was looking across the range of programs that Innovate actually offer. So when they go out and say we've got funding in these particular areas, that's described as programs. So the areas that we're looking at funding and asking for people to bring us innovative ideas that we will then fund come through this concept of programs. So we wanted to look across the programs and try and work out a way of saying, well, across all of those programs, can we see that there's particular emphasis on particular SDGs, and can we see that there's potential gaps? We've identified the SDGs that we think are material to UK policy and Innovate strategy. Are these actually reflected in what impacts are potentially coming through at program level? So the way that we did the heat map for impact is that we took each program and we thought about each of the SDGs. So we are looking across the 17 SDGs here and saying, is there a direct positive impact? Is there an indirect positive impact? Is there no impact? That's the yellow. So there's several areas where we don't see any impact, but there might be some negative impact, negative indirect impact, and negative direct negative impact. So the purpose of this stage of the tool was to start thinking about, can we identify where those are where there might be the gaps, and is the focus of the way that programs are constructed and articulated clear in addressing the SDGs, and are the SDGs that are being addressed the ones that are considered to be important at this particular point in time.
We had some fun workshops getting people to try this out as well, which was always good. So we had some project monitoring officers trying to map some of the projects onto the heat map, which led to great discussion and really interesting insights as well.
And the area that caused a lot of discussion and debate was the concept of dependencies and the interrelationship between different potential SDGs and how far you would count potential impact, which informed what we were doing when we're thinking about capacity building and thinking about how we upskill and possibly support Innovate as they would potentially roll this out. So then we can take that idea of the heat map a stage further, because if we are in a situation where we're identifying programs that actually do present the potential for negative impact, we can then again support in a strategic way the sense of, is there anything that we can do to mitigate that potential risk? And when we were thinking about this, one of the areas that we considered was, if you were considering projects that might involve development of, for example, batteries that might use rare earth metals. You know, there's a lot of potential environmental damage, degradation involved with extraction of rare earth metals. So can you write within the program, if you like, specification, the program details, articulate particular policies that mean that you can potentially mitigate some of that risk? So you would be thinking about those ideas of how you might try and mitigate risk. But equally, if there were areas where you could see that, you know, absolutely there's a direct positive impact, is there any way that you can tweak or rewrite the program in such a way that you were actually very clear that there was that potential for positive impact? So if we're thinking about quality education, do you actually write the program call to actually include, for example, the use and promotion of apprenticeships within the way things are structured within that call? So these are two areas where, as Lauren said, we were keen to support the strategic decision making at the program inception, at the beginning of the program development phase, rather than saying, oh, we've done stuff, what has been the impact of the stuff we've done? We're actually starting to think here, how can we use that SDG framework to actually think about shaping what we're going to be doing in the future, and therefore trying to align the funder goal, you know, up through towards that outcome that is aligned with the SDGs. But we do recognise that a part of this project was about measuring and about reporting. So we also needed to think about, well, how are we going to collect information about what's actually happened? So we also, as part of this, thought about indicators and metrics, and again had some interesting focus groups where we talked to people about what are the possible ways of measuring some of this stuff. And we sort of broadly identified 3 categories of indicators or metrics. The idea that the people that have been funded might self-report their perception of impact. And we recognise that that is a subjective measure, that people are potentially biased to optimism. They might see impact and report more impact than there actually is. And we also recognised that timing was a really big issue here, because at the immediate end of a project, you might have a sense of there's been some impact, but you might think actually looking at that impact after 2 years, actually you might see more evidence for the impact it's actually had. So we recognise potential difficulties there. The direct measures, the direct impact measures, things like environmental measures, CO2 emissions or hours of training or things like that, the people that we were talking to were much more comfortable with a quantitative measure that was sort of recognized in the external environment. So, you know, measuring tons of carbon, people were tended to be much more happy with. The measure that was probably most controversial was the measure of process or progress. So here we're actually thinking, well, if people are aware of external developments, so developments around equality, diversity and inclusion, or the climate-related disclosures, financial disclosures, the task force for climate-related financial disclosures, then these are, we identified that these are areas where you can actually think, well, actually an organisation can put in place a process, or they can be working towards a measure of progress, and we can use that as a proxy for actually a measure in that particular area. So what we learned through discussing the indicators and metrics, and we did actually propose the metrics, so actually measures for all of the material SDGs, and then we proposed indicators, possible metrics and possible measures for all 17. We realized that actually this is an area that is going to change and grow and develop, and possibly where, you know, the capacity will be built within the organization. So we were suggesting ideas, and already the language within Innovate is actually about a catalogue of indicators or measures. So they're beginning to think about, well, how can we articulate and measure something to do with that SDG in these and use these ideas to refine the suggestions that we actually had. So they were the 3 tools, and Lauren's going to take us through why we think these were important and what might happen if we don't embed them.
Yeah, so thinking back to at the start of the presentation when I gave you the kind of here's the ideal route, here's the route that we want with the most optimized journey through towards achieving some of these goals. What happens if you don't have interventions at certain points? So what we're kind of saying is that, you know, if you don't look at the connections that your goals have with the wider context, then you might remain quite insular and not actually work towards the broader goals that people are identifying with. And that might have problems for you as a funder later on when you come to make your argument for the amount of funding that you get, say, for example, in this case, BASE. The Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, which there isn't anymore, but anyway. So then, you know, if you're not taking on and looking at the heat maps, then your goals are not well aligned in terms of project goals and funder goals. And then it could take you longer to reach that scale of impact because you've not got that optimization of that journey. And then in the final possible trajectory there is that you don't have, if you're not measuring what's going on, you don't have sight of how the outcomes are fitting into wider goals. You can't reflect on the progress that you're making. So that you can see there that your journey, it might mean that you take longer to reach that scale of impact, or it might mean that you don't necessarily reach the goal achievement that's needed to get to those kind of SDG level impacts. So we can see that there's disjointed elements, and there's elements where the path could go a little bit astray. So that being said, those of you who are have worked with me or one of my students will know that this is one of my favourite questions to ask you all, and it's one that Tim Vorley often asks me too, so it's just getting passed down the line here. What's the so what? So why is this important? So Innovate UK now have some tools not only to measure their sustainability impacts, but can also understand what their strategic aims are for sustainability, and we think that's super important. We know that what gets measured matters. So, you know, if you start setting some metrics, you're going to probably change the behaviour behind those metrics. So you have to think carefully about what you are suggesting that people measure. If you think of the Innovate UK distributed £885 million in funding over 2020 and 2021. Think how many companies that means that they have reached out into, and what it could mean in terms of sustainability impact if those organisations are aligned under some strategic goals that Innovate UK has attached to a much wider agenda. And we can then see what impact it's having beyond the economic impact and start to build on that movement that way. And hopefully then we can get to some real high level and high scale impact from there. The kind of cumulative effect of it is really important. So I also wanted to do a little bit about why does this matter for Oxford Brookes Business School. So hopefully those of you who know OBBS know that we are prime members, so Principles for Responsible Management Education, and it's really important to us to embed that in as many ways as we can. So on the research and engagement side, there's lots of ongoing projects around sustainability at the moment. We've got the Small Business Sustainability Basics programme that we're doing in collaboration with Small Business Britain. We've also got small business sustainability research, and there's a report that's due to come out tomorrow on small business sustainability for those of you who are interested. Keep an eye on the social media there. We have a programme for local businesses in Oxfordshire about taming the carbon monster and looking at how businesses can start to make a difference in their carbon emissions. And we have got ongoing research that people like Steve and Kate are doing on sustainability reporting models. But we also connect that into our teaching, and we want to be able to see the things as aligned. I know that we've just had the first round of induction where all new students have had sustainability in their induction process as a mandatory session. And we've got courses at all levels looking at sustainability, including things like environmentally sustainable business and social enterprise and social innovation. So we're bringing that engagement, the research and the teaching all together to try and share insights as broadly as we can across these different areas. So what are we doing next? So the team that you saw at the start, we're all working together on putting this, I'm in a very sustainable room that chooses to switch its light out every 10 seconds. So the team that you saw at the start are working on a publication together at the moment, including some of the diagrams that we've shown you, particularly the ones about the different pathways to the SDGs. So if anyone has any feedback on that, we would very gratefully hear your thoughts and comments. We're looking at ways to support Innovate UK to escalate this work throughout the organisation, and that is very much including capacity building. We need to think about what skills are needed for people to implement what we've suggested. We provided a resource pack, so we had a lot of guidance documents around the tools that we built, but we think that some more kind of softer approaches to upskilling people are going to be really important and really valuable in this. So thinking about how do we make a bit of a personal approach and make these a little bit friendlier than just getting a PDF in your inbox telling you that this is what you're doing now. So we're hoping that that's going to take off soon as well. And then thinking about the broader context, we've already had a conversation with quite a few different partners about, is this replicable in other places? Other organisations are only going to want to be doing more and more of this, I think. So we're thinking about, is this something that we can try with another organisation to see if the same tools are appropriate, what modifications would be needed of those tools? Is it more about the intervention points, or is it about the specific design of things? And seeing what changes would need to be made in order for this to be to escalate that impact throughout more different organisations. So I think we have finished in time for a few questions if anyone has them, but we also want to encourage you to reach out to us if this is of interest to you, or find us on LinkedIn or something like that. So I'll open the floor to any questions though.
Many thanks, Lauren and Kate. Fantastic. Yes, any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or indeed just to open your mic and ask any questions you have of Lauren and Kate. Some fantastic work there, with really impactful, given the level of funding that Innovate UK oversee, hugely impactful. So any questions at all?
It's okay, Kate, we're perfect apparently. Don't need to worry about
perfect, Lauren.
We're perfect.
Well, if I can just burst that bubble a little, no, just by asking a question. That final point you made there about looking kind of next steps and looking at where this goes in future, and thinking about other organisations this might be applicable for. Obviously, Innovate UK is a particular type of organisation in terms of it works with a whole range of different organisations that it provides funding for and so on, and is able to direct business activity in that sense. Does this have any of the tools or the metrics and so on, and indeed the wider kind of SDG framework? Does that have any kind of wider resonance in terms of kind of, you know, corporate, in terms of the corporate world, or indeed an organisation like Oxford Brookes University?
So if I'll take a first crack at this, and then maybe Kate can jump in as well. I think what's interesting is the way that I've been thinking about this is of Innovate UK as being an organisation with a kind of hybrid belonging to different worlds. And what I would say is that for me, increasingly, many actors and organisations within our economy are increasingly hybrid. A lot of organisations are working with different goals, different institutional logics in mind, and that is where those tension points come up. And I think that some of these tools are then applicable. And I think it, you know, in terms of Brookes' own work, I think it is important for us to think about it in terms of embedding in the SDGs in decision making, because we fit into that category as well. We do have business-facing programmes, we do have student-facing programmes, we do have research. We are governed a lot by what goes on in the public sector. That's where our funding, a lot of our research funding comes from. So we do fit into that category of a kind of hybrid organisation. So it might be that that is an interesting next step for us to consider as well. Kate, I don't know if you want to build on that.
No, so I do think, I think the interesting point that came very much from Innovate, or us challenging Innovate, was that move towards thinking about how do we think strategically up front. And so if you think about other business situations and environments, there will be a decision-making process where an intervention can happen earlier that might influence the way that the goals can be achieved, or the extent to which goals can be achieved. And I think that could be within the corporate world or within the public world, or indeed dealing with the hybrid situation. And Nick, I just picked up in the chat a question that's come in from Jamal about advice for the MBA students who have to embed the SDGs in their capstone. Not knowing anything about your assignment brief here, so just talking off the top of my head, I think you could do a couple of things. I think you could think about whether the area that you're working on in terms of the capstone addresses a particular SDG. So is it related directly to one of the SDGs? That might be one way. Or actually thinking whether or not there's a sense of how the project might influence thinking, as we've done here, across a range of SDGs. Lauren, anything you'd add?
In terms of MBA projects, I think it depends on the context of what you're trying to achieve. I know that's a really academic answer. We always like to say it depends, but it's all about it's all about looking at the overall framework and figuring out how you're going to work with it in a way that isn't gestural, in a way that's really meaningful. And that helps you avoid those kind of critiques of kind of cherry picking and kind of the kind of greenwashing accusations. I think if you can justify what you're doing in the way that, you know, we've been kind of trying to justify the approach that we've taken, then it should be stand you in good stead for your MBA project when it comes round. We had one more question, which I think I'll just answer really quickly, from Stephen about the findings that are going to be out tomorrow. So the findings that are out tomorrow are a different project. I don't want to go too far into it because it's not what this presentation was about. But basically we did some research with small businesses to understand their understanding of net zero and the net zero agenda. So what you're going to find in there is things about looking at what actions small business are already taking, what they're committing to taking over the next 12 months. So recommendations for policymakers, small business and big business and the intermediaries about how to support small businesses on their net zero journey. Really quick.
And I think the final comment we've got in the chat there from Steve, who we just to thank Steve, who was instrumental in the work that we did here. So Steve, we've presented much of Steve's work. So so shout out there. But the UN Global Compact publishing its report on how different governments are actually working with the SDGs. The report there does suggest that it calls for government to take a stronger lead, and the UK government is not doing as much as it might do. Steve, is there anything you'd actually add in terms of that digest?
Sorry, I was trying to actually paste in the link and I've lost it. But just to say that I was talking to Karen Crisp a couple of weeks ago, and she's already included that report in her teaching. So, you know, we are up there actually pushing that forward.
Yeah.
But the summary of that report is, you know, the SDGs are out there as a framework.
Yeah,
but we're
absolutely.
not actually getting close.
No, we're nowhere near close at all as a nation. And I think it's quite interesting just to pour through that report to actually look at each of the individual SDGs to see what's going on and to see where we're lagging, and also to see what the UNGC propose to take it forward faster, basically. But a real clarion call to the government to say that over the last 5-6 years, you know, not enough progress has been made in any way, shape, or form. So I think in the context of this, if Innovate UK can push this forward, you know, they really are taking a lead across government in that sense.
Brilliant. I think that sounds
fantastic. Thank you so much, Lauren and Kate and Steve for your contribution as well. A really interesting and as I say, a really important project which has you know, real potential for significant impact. And on a topic that's as Lauren said, very close to the work that we do at Oxford Brookes Business School. So thank you, Lauren, for doing a bit of promotion in terms of the range of activities to engage in and how we're building sustainability into a whole range of our activity. And we are undergoing at the moment a project supported by the National Union of Students to assess our impact in the business school in terms of the SDGs and where we can make some small and some larger changes to improve our performance in relation to the SDGs. So thank you everyone for attending. Great to see you all. I've just put in the chat details of our upcoming alumni sessions. So as I say, we've got the next alumni session is on the 25th of October with Dr. Brianna Wyatt on the topic of dark tourism, which is likely to be particularly interesting. Co-creation, innovation and death, the future of dark tourism. So if that's not an enticing workshop title, then I don't know what is. And then on the 8th of November, we have Dr. Christian Ehrlich with Setting Goals and Finding Happiness, a really an excellent stream of research that Christian's been engaged in that he's going to present on. So please do join us. Details can be found at the link there. So please do go there, find out more about the sessions and register. So that all that remains is to say thank you, Steve, for the link to the Global Compact report as well. Just grab it before I switch the close the meeting. So thank you everyone, great to see you all. Thank you again to Kate and Lauren for a really interesting presentation, and I hope to see you all in a couple of weeks' time.
Thanks everyone for coming along. It was lovely to see you all.
Thank you everybody. Bye.
Bye.